Hi, it's Jordan1, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make my latest Loomigurumi, which is a cute little cupcake. So the one I'm going to show you in the tutorial is this one on the left. So I have the rainbow colors for the wrapper, and I have a vanilla cupcake. And then here's another one where I use just two colors, and that is a chocolate cupcake. So you can see I used 5 colors for the wrapper on this one and 2 for this one, and you can see how it changes that spiral look. When you do the 5 colors, the spiral angles towards the left, and you can see where the band goes over to the next row. In the 2 color version, you can see that the spiral pattern angles more to the right, and the band that swoops over is actually next to its same color, and so it just has a little bit of a different look to it. So I'm really happy with the way that this turned out, and I hope that everyone else is too. To make your cupcake, you're going to need a hook of some sort. So I have the Rainbow Loom metal hook. You're going to need some type of stuffing, so I have polyfil. I'm going to be using a twist tie just to help me get my magic ring started. So that is optional, but it's very helpful, especially if you're new to doing Loomigurumi. And I'm going to be using a few clips, or you could use stitch markers. If you wanted any kind of decorations for your cupcake, like beads or buttons, you can add those. And then as far as my band counts, I used 125 of the neon blue, and those are from Rainbow Loom. Actually, all of my bands are. I used 54 skin tone, and the ones I used actually came out of the camouflage pack. I used 202 of the rainbow colors, so I have 5 different colors. So if you break that down, it's approximately about 40 of each of those 5 colors, and those came out of the dual-sided carnival pack and also the purple lily. And then finally for my base, I just used plain white, and I used 43 of those. I'm going to begin by making a magic ring of 6, so for that I have 7 rubber bands. So I am going to be using the twist tie, so if you have this, you just want to put it right next to your hook. If not, you'll just use your plain hook, and then you're going to take your first rubber band and you want to triple this. So it goes on, twist, back on, twist, and back on, and you just want to pull this up and then bend it in half, and that's just going to keep those 3 loops together and then also give you something to grab onto. So if you don't have this, you would just use your fingers to pinch those 3 loops. And then you should have 6 rubber bands remaining, so you're just going to take one at a time, pull through those 3 loops, get it back on your hook, and one through the other. So you're always working from the front. You're going to push through those 3 loops, pull through your next band, get the other end back on. So this time you're going to have 3 loops, one through the other 2. Again, push through. This is your 3rd rubber band. So from now on you're always going to have the 3 loops, one through the other 2. And then here's our 4th. 5th, and 6th. So you can remove your twist tie if you're using one, and then you're going to put a clip or a stitch marker on the band that's on your hook. So that's just letting us know that that's the end of the row. You're going to stretch these out just to try and get them evenly spaced. And then your stitch count should be 6. So a stitch is this little sideways V that's on the outside edge of your magic ring. So to count them, you would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 6th one, or the last one in whatever row you're working with, is always on your hook. In row 2, you're going to need 8 bands. We're doing an increase followed by 2 singles, and then repeat that. So it's a 2-1-1-2-1-1 pattern. So we're going into our first stitch from front to back. You want to make sure you go under both loops. We're doing an increase to start, so that just means 2 in the same stitch. So there's 1, and back through that same stitch for your second. And then in stitch 2 we have a single. In stitch 3 we have our next single. And then we're starting that pattern all over again. So in stitch 4 we're doing an increase. So that's my first, and back through that same one for a second. And then I should have 2 stitches remaining, and there's just going to be 1 in each. So the last stitch is always going to be where your clip is. And then you always want to take your clip and move it to the band that's on your hook. Again, that's just helping mark the end of that row. In row 3, you're going to need 8 rubber bands, and we're doing a little bit of a different stitch, and this is called the back post single crochet. So this one's going to be a little bit different. Up until now we've been going in from the front to back underneath of a stitch. So this one is actually going to go from back to front, and it's going to work around the post. So let me just show you what I mean. You can see here that we did already go through this stitch, and normally we would move over to the next stitch, but what we're actually going to work around is this post that's in between the stitches. So I am going to go from the back side. I'm going to push down through this stitch that my band has already gone through in the previous row. So from back to front I'm going to push through, and then in this next stitch over I'm going to push out. So if you look, I have these 2 vertical bands that popped up on my hook here, and that's what's considered the post. So I'm going to take my band, it's going to go through, back on, and 1 through the other 2. So now you're always going to go back down through that same stitch that we just came up. You'll see the hole here. So from the back side you're pushing down through, next stitch over you're pushing out, and you'll see these pop right up on your hook. If you don't see that, it means you've gone through an incorrect part, and you're going to just pull through, back on, 1 through the other 2. Again, back down through that hole or stitch, up through the next. So it's actually pretty easy once you understand where you're supposed to go. So down through, back up, see that post, and do that single crochet. So this is what's going to stand out on the outside as the rings for the icing. So I think it gives it a pretty unique look. If you happen to make my Loomigurumi cake, I did use the same stitch. So we have a total of 8. It's going to take us back to our clip here. So down and back up. And it looks like I might have got hung up on a band I didn't want, so let me try this again. Make sure, there we go, I can see the post. Okay, now I can tell I have the 2 vertical bands or loops there. And then I'm going to take off my clip. I'm going to do one more thing before I add the clip here. Where I just took off my clip, I'm going to take this band and I want to pull that down through, because that's going to complete my circle. Otherwise it's going to look like a little bit of a gap in this outer row here. So I'm just going to hold this in my fingers. Just don't want that to come apart. And from the inside I'm going to push up through that stitch where my clip was, and I'm going to grab this band and pull it down through. So now at this point I am going to add that clip. In row 4, you're going to need 14 bands, and the pattern that we're going to be following is 221, 221, 22. So the row that we're actually going to be going in is the inside here. You can see we have the stitches that we made from our back post single crochet, but we're actually going to go in these inner stitches. So what I'm going to recommend that you do is take your piece that you've formed so far and actually just flip it inside out. It's just going to make the stitches we need to go in more apparent. So we're going from front to back. This end one here that's right below where your rubber band is, we're going to skip that, and we're going to the next one over here, pushing from front to back under both loops, and we're going to do an increase. So that's one, and then back through for the second. And then in the next one over, we're doing an increase. And then in the third stitch, we have a single. And then we're just going to continue to repeat that. We won't be able to do it 3 complete times, but we'll get 2 and almost to the end of the third. So I had tried a lot of different shapes, and this is the one I settled on. It's pretty much increasing here because I didn't want it to get too pointy on the top. So here's my single. Oops. And then I have 2 stitches left, so each of these is going to get an increase. Last one where the clip is, and I have 2 bands left here. Sometimes I feel like this clip just gets right in my way. And I'm going to move my clip. And then if I flip this the correct side out here, you can see how this circle is like a little edge of part of the icing. In row 5, you're going to need 14 bands, and this is another row where we're going to do the back post single crochet. So again, we're going to start in this first stitch. It's going to be the one where your last increase was, and from the back side through this hole here, this opening, you're going to push through and over to your next stitch. You'll see that post pop right up on your hook, and you're going to do that single crochet. And then again, you're always going back down through the same stitch from the back side and pushing out the next. So we're just going to continue to repeat that all the way around until we do 14. So I did try a lot of different methods for the icing, just to make it look more swirled around in a circle. I actually have another variation, which I started with just a single chain. So I decided to film this one because I like the fact that it's completed in rounds. And it's all one piece except for the base. I figured this would probably be the easiest for people to not have to worry about stitching other sections together. So here's my last one. It's going to come out where my clip is. And again, if you pull up as you're pulling through, it's going to help from getting hung up. And then, just like we did in the row up here, we have to get this band to go down through just to complete that circle. So I'm just going to take my hook out. I don't want to lose that. I'm going to come up through where my clip is, grab the loop, pull it down through, and then I'm just going to move that clip. And this does tend to want to close in on you, so it doesn't hurt to just take a couple seconds and sort of stretch this apart. In row 6, you're going to need 21 bands, and we're doing a pattern of an increase in every other stitch. So we're starting with an increase, so the pattern is 2, 1, 2, 1, and so on. So just like before, we want to go in these inner loops, these inner stitches, not the ones created from the back post single crochet. So it's a little bit easier to see now because it's a little more opened up. So you can either leave it like this and go in like this, or if you do find it easier, you can flip this inside out once again. I guess that's the way I'll show it. So I'm not going in the stitch that's directly below here. I'm going to the next one over, again front to back, and we're doing an increase to start. So there's 1 and 2, and then a single for the second, and then an increase in the third, and then just keep repeating that. So this is really going to help to widen this icing out. I had different versions that I created where it was a lot pointier at the top, and I don't know, every time I would make a different version I would find something that I wasn't thrilled about, and then I would rework it. So I thought that this one was a good combination of all the different ones I had tried, because it wasn't overly pointy in the middle, but it was higher the way that a regular cupcake would be. So hopefully everyone else agrees with what I settled on and that everybody loves their cupcakes. So in my second to last one, I have my very last increase. And then again, where my clip is, I have a single. So I can just move that. And then let me just flip it right side out. And then you can see we have our second row. You're going to need 21 bands for row 7, and as you may have guessed, we're going to be doing the back post single crochet once again. So if you did have it turned inside out, make sure you have it flipped right side out, and from the back once again, where this opening is, going through and pushing back out, and then down through the same, out the next, and then just keep repeating. So hopefully by now everybody has the hang of this back post single. And things are just moving right along. If you wanted to, you could use different colors. Like every row that's a back post single, you could use a different color for. I actually tried it and it's kind of interesting. I actually thought I would really love it, and then when I did it I was kind of uncertain about it. But you can always try that and see what you think. I contemplated doing that for the tutorial just for the simple fact that it would be a little bit easier to see if I was showing two different colors. But then I changed my mind. So hopefully I'm explaining it well enough that you're not having any trouble seeing where you need to go. So here's my second to last. And then again, coming back up where the clip is. It's my last one. So it seems a little bit tighter. And then we have to get this to come down through. So from where my clip is, I'm reaching up. This is pulling down through. And then I'm just going to move that clip. And you can stretch this out again. If anything looks out of whack, you can try and reshape it. In row 8, you're going to need 32 bands. And we're doing a pattern of an increase in every other stitch. So again, it's 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and repeat. So once again, we're working on the inner stitches here. And I'm not going to flip it inside out this time because I feel like it's pretty easy to see them now. Our stitch count got so large that it's pretty well opened up. So one more time here, we're not going in the very first one. Going to the next one over. Make sure you're just going through the one stitch, and we're doing an increase. So of course if you wanted to, you can definitely flip it inside out again. It's totally up to you. Next one gets a single. The only thing is when you don't turn it, you can, if you go through this stitch, you might pick up one that you don't want, so just be careful about that. And I have my increase. And a single. So again, I'm just going to keep repeating the pattern. So this is going to get it nice and wide. This is actually the very last row of icing that we're going to be doing. And then we're going to switch to our cake color. And we're not doing any more back post single crochets. So we got those all out of the way. So I used the brown in my other cupcake. And then for this one I'm going to use the vanilla. So the vanilla color that I'm using actually came out of the Rainbow Loom Camouflage pack. I might have already mentioned this because I wind up filming the beginning of the tutorial after I already make the cupcake or whatever I'm filming. So basically what I'm saying is I shoot it out of sequence. So sometimes I might repeat myself because I say it here, but then I want to mention it in the beginning, so then I say it twice. So if that ever happens, just ignore me. But anyway, the vanilla I use out of the camouflage pack is that light tan. Or I'm sure you could pick one out of the skin tone bands. I know that Rainbow Loom makes several. So you probably have many different shade options you can choose from. And let's see here. I have a single. And then again, my last one here is where the clip is. And let me just move this clip. I feel like I can't see what I'm doing. Here we go. Go through the stitch. And it's going to be an increase. So that should give us our stitch count of 32. And again, what I'm going to suggest is just go around, and since we did fit so many bands in, just spread these out. And that should make it nice and wide. In row 9, you're going to need 27 bands, and you're going to change to whatever you want your cake color to be. So I have the light tan for vanilla, and the pattern is going to be 4 single crochet and then a decrease. So you're just going to continue repeating that, and it's going to end on 2 single crochets. So we are just going to be going inside the inner loop for this. So you're just going to push through your stitch, but you're only going in this first loop, the one that's closest to the inside here. So push through and come out the middle of the V. I am going to take this first band and pull through everything. That's known as a slip stitch, just because I'm changing the color. And then the next one, again, just the inner loop. And then just a regular single crochet. And then we have a third. A fourth, and then stitches 5 and 6 are actually going to go together. So that's a decrease. So what you do is you push through this inner loop, and then you pull back towards yourself and again push through the next inner loop. So you have the 2 bands on your hook here, and you're going to pull through both of those, back on, and 1 through the other 2. So now we have 4 singles. And don't worry if your bands look like they're kind of a little bit misshapen, because we're just going to adjust those at the end. And now the next 2 stitches again are going to go together for that decrease. So through the first, pull back, through the second, get your band, pull through both loops, back on, 1 through the other 2. So we're just going to continue repeating that. So the reason that I just did the inner loop is I wanted the icing to look like it sort of stuck out a little bit more, the way that if you had a normal cupcake, the icing would be a little bit more on top. It's not completely flat against. So I did my 4 and I'm doing my decrease. I think it's a little bit harder when you're doing a chocolate cupcake to get the right color combination. At least I found that it was. I made a couple different ones with chocolate and then I thought that the colors sort of clashed. So now I have my next decrease. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what colors everyone chooses. So I have this pattern repeating one more time. So I have my 4, and then I have my decrease, and this is my last decrease in the row, and then I have 2 stitches left here, so these are just going to be singles. Last one where my clip is, again just that inner loop. And move your clip. So now what I'm going to do is just smooth this all out so they're not all bunched up together, and it'll turn out quite nice. In row 10 you're going to need 27 bands again, and they are still going to be your cake color. So we're doing just 1 single crochet into every stitch. Now at the beginning here, this first one may look like a stitch, but it's actually not. It's what I call a false stitch, and that's made from doing our slip stitch. So if you would look over to the side, you can kind of tell that this is all the same band. This is one part of this band. So this is actually your true stitch. So you're going into that. And this time we are going under both loops, just doing a regular single crochet, and we're doing just 1 in each. So it's pretty straightforward here. And this is going to be the last row that we're doing of the cake color. So we only had 2 rows of that. And then we're going to make the top edge of the cupcake paper, and then we'll build that down from there. And if you wanted to, you could try and mess around with different colors for the cake. I know that they do make different cupcakes and cakes with that confetti look. So if you wanted, you could either try and change up the colors within the rows, or you could add little seed beads or something for tiny little dots. And of course the same thing goes for the icing at the top. You can certainly add any kind of decorations to that that you'd like. And again, if you are concerned about the shape here, don't worry about it, because we're going to smooth this out. And anytime you don't do any increases or decreases, it still feels like it wants to close in on you. You'll find that too when you're doing the cupcake paper. It's just the nature of how it goes. And we are going to be stuffing this, so That'll definitely fill out any sections that you feel might be going inward as well. Now in our last one here, there's kind of a larger gap from doing our slip stitch. So let me just take off this clip. What I'm going to suggest that you do is go through the stitch, but then also you want to pick up a band of your cake color. So I'm going to just go under this loop here in the next one over. It really doesn't matter which one you pick up, but I want to try and do one that's not going to have any of the blue show through. And just do that regular single crochet. So that's just going to close up any gap that was there. And then I'm going to reattach my clip. And again, you can just smooth these out. In row 11, we're going to start the wrapper of the cupcake. So you're going to need 27 bands. So I'm doing this rainbow assortment here. These are the dual-sided bands that have the color on the outside, and then these particular ones have white in the center. So we are just going to be going in the outer loop for this entire row, and it's going to be one single crochet in each, and we are doing a slip stitch every single time. So in the first one here, you're going from the center of the V, pushing outwards just through that outer loop. You're going to take your first color, you're pulling through everything for your slip stitch, and one through the other. Again, next one over, just the outer loop, pull through everything, and one through the other. So we're just going to keep repeating that process the whole way around. And the reason that I decided to do a slip stitch every time is I wanted to give it just a little bit of a different look than just a regular single crochet. Gives it more of a zigzaggy look to it. So it's not going to be exactly the way that a wrapper would look, sort of like that accordion look. But it's going to be sort of close to that. So I actually really like the way that this turns out with these lighter pastel colors. I actually didn't try it with any of the darker colors, but I'm sure that would look nice too. And I think with the dual-sided bands, it does really give it a little bit of extra pizzazz. I know at my local Michael's, I don't know if you live in the United States or possibly in Canada, I'm not sure if they have stores in Canada, but there's a store called Michael's Craft Store, and I've been getting my rainbow loom bands there since the beginning. But really they didn't have like a whole lot of color choices or anything special or limited edition. But I did notice around Christmas time they started to carry some of these dual-sided bands. So that's actually where I bought both of these packs from. And of course you can always order online. So I have two left here. So you're not going to be able to complete your color pattern the whole way around, but it'll all work out in the end here. So I'm just going to move my clip, and again, I always like to just sort of smooth this out. In row 12, you're going to need a total of 25 bands, and we are doing 2 decreases. So the first 2 stitches are going to go together, and then you're going to do 12 single crochet, and then the next 2 stitches together, followed by 11 single crochet. So if you notice, I started on a green because the last color I did was yellow. So whatever your pattern is that you're doing, just continue following that around with whatever your next color in the pattern from the previous row would be. So for this row, we are doing 1 single crochet into each stitch. We are not doing slip stitches anymore, and we are just going to go in the inner loop. So it's the opposite of what we did for the previous row. And I just want to point out that every single one on the previous row was a slip stitch, so the stitches are going to look a little bit different. We dealt with these a little bit in the previous rows when we changed color. So what you're going to see is basically like an upside down V, and the first part, or what may look like the first stitch of that color, is going to angle up, and that's not actually the true stitch, it's the next one over to the left. So whenever you see your stitch, it's always the farthest one over to the left. So for example, in the first one here, it's this pink. You would ignore this yellow, it's the one to the left. In the green, here's the first part, ignore that, it's the one over to the left, and so on. So we are starting with a decrease. So I'm starting here with my first pink. I'm only going in this inner loop, so I'm pushing from the inside out. Then I'm going to pull back towards myself. Remember, you're ignoring this part of the yellow going into the left side. Push out through that inner loop. And these are just regular single crochets, so you're just pulling through those 2 loops. Get it back on your hook. You'll have 3 loops every time. 1 pulls through the other 2. So then over to the next, it's the one to the left. And don't worry, your colors are probably not going to match up at this part. So we're doing a total of 12 single crochet just through that inner loop. You're always pulling 1 through the other 2. And then this is going to take us right around halfway around the cupcake. So that's the goal. I wanted the decreases to be evenly spaced. And the reason I chose to do 2 decreases is I wanted my stitch count to be an odd number. So we have 3 more here. And then that brings us up to our next decrease. So once again, go through the first loop, pull back, go through the second loop, and now this time your colors are going to match up, at least if you're using 5 colors the way that I am. And now 1 in each for the rest of the way. So you can see, at least with my pattern every time, that my colors are matching up. So I have a pink under a pink, and just keeps repeating. So I have my last two here. And then I'm going to move my clip. And I'm just going to take a second and smooth this out. You can see that by going in just the inner loop here, that it made this upper row sort of stick out, have a little bit of a lip to it. In row 13, you're going to need 25 bands again. So I'm still following the same pattern. I just decided to lay them in piles instead of laying them out on the whole desk. So once again, I want to start with my next color in my pattern. So if you're using 5 colors the way that I am, your bands that are going through the stitches are always going to match colors. Because I used 5 colors and our stitch count's 25, so since 5 is a multiple of 25, they're going to line up. If you're using 2, for example, that is an even number and you're dealing with an odd number of stitches, so your colors will not match up. So it really depends on the number of colors that you're using. So this time I'm going through both loops of the stitch. Again, no slip stitches, we're just doing regular single crochet. So I'm just following my color pattern here. And if you used a different number, like a 3 or a 4, you can just kind of play around and see how they're going to turn out. Every little thing that you change makes a difference. For example, I was going to do a stitch count of 24. Some of my prototypes that I created, I had a stitch count of 24. But then I settled on the 25 because with my 5 rainbow colors it worked out nicely. And then also if you wanted to do 2, that also works out well for how your spirals line up. And this is actually the first row in a total of 5 that we're going to be doing in this pattern just to build our cupcake wrapper. So it's just going to grow down from here. So I'm actually going to let you do the other 4 rows on your own, and I'll show you that in a moment when I'm done this part. And again, every time you're building a row that is not expanding, it does always seem to want to cave in on you. So don't worry about that. After I'm done each row, we can just stretch it out a little bit. I always like to do that. So I'm back to the start here. Just going to move that clip. And then, as I said, I like to just go along here, and you don't want to pull too hard, but just kind of smooth it out so you can see how it's starting to look. In rows 14, 15, 16, and 17, you're going to need 25 bands for each one of those rows. So you'll just continue to follow your color pattern. So I have my rainbow pattern set up here. And since it's just the 1 single crochet into each stitch the regular way, I'm going to go ahead and let you do that on your own. So you can pause here and finish that now, and I will see you back here shortly. The last thing that I need to do is to make the base. So that's going to start with a magic ring of 6, so I have my 7 rubber bands. So I am just going to use all white for the base. So if you do have that twist tie, just again, like we started at the beginning, put that next to your hook, and you're going to triple the first band. So just twist and put it back on 2 times, and then that's going to give you your 3 loops. And then you're going to have 6 bands remaining, and you're just going to pull through those 3 loops and back on your hook, one through the other, and then just continue to push through and do each band one at a time. So you can really choose any color that you like. You can just do a solid color. You can continue with a rainbow pattern, whatever your colors are. Since it's really not going to be seen, I'm just going to stick with all the plain white here. So I'll add my clip and then just spread these around the circle. You'll need 12 bands for row 2, and we are doing an increase in every stitch. So we're doing 2 in each here. So that is just going to double our stitch count. And we do want this to turn out as flat as possible. You'll notice as you're forming this, it is going to curl inward just a little bit, but we're just going to try and get it nice and flat. And then in that last stitch again, I have my last increase. So this actually did stay relatively flat here. If you start with a magic ring of 5, I think it wants to curl in a little bit more, but with 6 it's pretty flat. In row 3, we're doing an increase in every stitch once again, so you're going to need 24 bands. So once again, we're doing 2 in each. And again, we're just trying to get this nice and flat. So this is going to really widen it out here. Sometimes if you try and put too many stitches on the same row, it becomes overly full, and then it kind of gets a little bit wavy looking. So there's kind of this fine line with trying to get it to not curve inward, but then also not making it too full and making it get wavy or buckly. So this is actually the last row that we're doing on the base. And when you're making a base for something that you're going to be stitching together with an upper part, you do want to try and get your stitch count pretty close to even. So this is going to give us a stitch count of 24, and then on the upper part of our cupcake, our stitch count is 25, so we just have 1 band that we're going to have to do an increase with. So that's pretty simple. If you happen to make my Loomigurumi cake, we actually had a couple more stitches we had to do increases with because the counts were a little bit farther off than that. So here's the last one. Next I'm going to add the stuffing. So I'm using some polyfil. So this is a nice open piece to stuff. So you want to make it pretty full, but not so full that you're making the stitches spread apart. And what I like to do is to just add most of the stuffing and then not overstuff it at first, especially because your fluff is going to get all caught in your stitches. So I like to get just the upper part pretty full, and then once I stitch it together I'll leave a little bit open so I can finish stuffing the bottom. The final thing that I need to do is to take my base and my main cupcake part and stitch them together. So I have 25 bands here, and again I'm just following my rainbow pattern. So the way that we have been forming the base has been with what I'm calling the inside facing us, and so I want the opposite side to be on the outside. So I'm going to flip this over, and the way that this would normally be going around to the next stitch would now be going in a clockwise direction. So I'm going to go in this next stitch over, and I'm going to push through both loops, and then I'm going to get the loose band on my hook, and I can take off the clip. And now this is going to connect here to the loose band on this other section, and this is going around in a counterclockwise direction. You can see stuffing already wants to get hung up in the stitches. So what I'm going to do is now take this loose band on my hook, and in a counterclockwise direction, the next stitch over, I'm going to push through that. I can take my clip out. So now you have a bunch of bands on your hook, and I'm going to take my first rubber band. It's going to pull through the stitch. It's going to pull through the loose band. It's going to pull through the other loose band and the other stitch. So you're pulling through everything that was on your hook. Get the other end back on. You have just your two loops from that same rubber band, and one will pull through the other. And then you're going to the next stitch over. So the next stitch is actually how we just connected this loose white band. By connecting that, we formed our next stitch over on the base, and then the next stitch over on the cupcake. And my colors are always going to match up. So I'm pulling through everything. We're doing slip stitches every time. And we're just going over one on each piece the entire way. The only thing that's going to be different is at the very end we're going to go through the same stitch on the base twice, since we have one stitch count difference. So I like to do these slip stitches every time because it just gives it a little bit fancier of a look. So it's really pretty easy. The main thing is just make sure you're going to the very next stitch on each piece and you're not skipping any, because if you do that you're going to throw your stitch count off. And again, the stuffing is always the most annoying part to me, that the stuffing wants to poke up through. No matter how careful you think you're being, it always happens. That's why I try not to stuff it too full to start with, and then I add the rest of the stuffing when I have a little bit of an opening still left. So hopefully everyone is really liking the way their cupcakes are turning out. I was actually super excited with this pattern because I just loved the look of these pastel rainbow colors. I actually made tried to make a cupcake with a different dual pack. I had the Galaxy, I think they were called Galaxy bands. They had black inside instead of white. And I was so excited because I thought that the blue that came in the pack was sort of like a turquoise blue. Thought that would match the icing perfectly. But once I actually had the cupcake made, I just wasn't crazy about it. So I went back to the drawing board, and I'm happy that I did because I think this turned out so much nicer. So I think I'll do a couple more, and then I'm going to add some more stuffing. I think maybe I'll finish out this row here. So I have a little bit of an opening left, and I'm just going to take some more stuffing and just finish filling this out. So I think you definitely need little smaller sections when you get to the end here. You can see my hook grabbed some. So I think that looks pretty good. Again, I'm just going to try and get it away from the edges. So the next stitch is over. So I have two left here, and as I explained earlier, we have just one left on the base, but two left on the cupcake part. So that's not a big deal. We're just going to have to go through the stitch on the base twice. So I'm going back through that same one and out through the next on the cupcake. It's going to be my last single crochet here. I'm going to pull this super tight. I mean, don't snap your band or anything, but you want to make it nice and tight. And then I'm just going to reach up from the inside, try not to get stuffing caught in there. And I'm just going to pull this in, and I can still see it sticking up just a bit. Let me just pull this down the rest of the way. And then you can do some adjusting. I'm going to try and get this to be a little bit more towards the outside. And then my cupcake is complete. I hope that everyone loves their new Loomigurumi cupcakes. You can always leave me comments on YouTube and Facebook. You can post pictures of your creations to my Facebook page. And please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel, so that way you can stay up to date on my latest tutorials. You can also find me on Pinterest and Instagram, so please feel free to share your pictures and comments there too. And if you do share your picture on Instagram, please don't forget to tag me. And you can also like and subscribe to those as well. Thanks for watching!